Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Dutch National Military Museum taking a look at some of the interesting and unusual rifles in their extensive firearms collection. Specifically today we are taking a look at a semi-automatic conversion of a Dutch Mannlicher bolt-action rifle. Now this specifically is a Snabb conversion. Snabb is actually not the inventor, Snabb is a company name. It's a Swedish company. The design itself was invented by a Swedish guy named Renberg. And what's interesting about this is he came up with a general system for adapting bolt-action rifles to semi-auto. And then he went around trying to market it to every country that he could think of. So while this is the only Dutch Mannlicher conversion known of this type, there are other types of Snabb conversions to other guns. So you'll find pictures out there of a P17 Enfield conversion, a 1903 Springfield conversion, an 1893 Mauser conversion, a Krag Jorgensen conversion. Pretty much any type of bolt-action turn-bolt rifle, the Snabb company would be happy to turn into a semi-auto. Now they did this in the late 1930s. The patent for this was filed in 1938 in the United States. And clearly the idea was to find these countries, probably mostly medium-sized countries, where they had a nice, a full army, but it was an army equipped with bolt-action rifles that didn't have the budget for brand new semi-automatics. And what they probably were trying to do was convince them to take their existing rifles and pay less than it would cost for new guns to convert their rifles into semi-autos. And thus, for half the money, you get all the firepower. Nobody fell for this because once you take this gun apart, you realize that it is an incredibly nightmarishly complicated gun to disassemble, to clean, and even the action is pretty weird. So, without further ado, let's step into disassembly. Now I need to warn you, we spent about an hour getting this thing disassembled, so I don't have all of the footage of us trying to figure it out. We are going to pick this story up with the gun completely torn apart, and then we're going to slowly put it back together for you on camera, pointing out how it works along the way. Okay, I lied a little bit. We're going to take a look at the outside before we start disassembly. So, what we have here is a bolt handle. This is completely new. The original bolt handle of the Mannlicher bolt has been removed. And as you'll see in a minute, the bolt has actually been extended at the rear. In addition, the receiver has been extended to the rear. So the original receiver would have ended right about here, behind the bolt stop, and they've added a longer tube and a threaded receiver cap at the end. This bolt handle allows us to open the action. The original safety on this rifle would have been on the tail of the bolt, which is now inaccessible. So a new safety has been added down here on the trigger guard. It is a push-button safety. So that's fire, and that is safe. And it's a pretty simple system. All it's doing is pushing a bar up behind the trigger to lock it in place. That's all the safety does on this. The rear sight is still the original Dutch Mannlicher rear sight. Which is going to extend out like so. There is this button in the bolt handle, and that is the manual hold open. That allows you to lock the bolt open. So if you pull the bolt all the way to the back and push that button in, it locks the bolt in place. That's important for disassembly as well as various types of manual handling. You actually have to have the bolt locked open or at least held back in order to remove the action from the stock. Note that these guns, all of the Snabb conversions have this sort of thumbhole stock, which actually looks very reminiscent of 1990s era assault weapon ban rifles in the United States. This is actually more comfortable than it looks, and the reason this has to be there is because you have to have such this lengthened receiver tube, you don't have space for a traditional style of stock. The pistol or the trigger would be way too far in front of where you would hold the rifle. So you have to add a pistol grip of some sort, and I think Snabb figured it was stronger to do it this way than just to have a plain pistol grip sticking out. That said, there is a Snabb in the Swedish Army Museum that does have just a standalone pistol grip on it. And interestingly, this one has a butt plate that appears to be from a 1914 or 1917 Enfield, I believe, and it has a butt trap that is unuseful. There is no actual hollow behind the butt trap door. Just solid wood and disappointment. And this was manufactured on a 1919 production Hembrug Dutch Mannlicher. Now, with that aside, let's start our disassembly. Now, this normally would feed from standard Dutch Mannlicher clips. However, the follower and the floor plate are missing on this particular one. There should be a little follower arm pushing up. Also, interestingly, when we pull the barrel out, you can see that it's actually been rebarreled with a .303 British caliber barrel. Now, what's interesting about that is the case head of the .303 British is virtually identical to the .65 Dutch cartridge, and it allows .303 British to be used on the same bolt face as .65 Dutch and using the same clips as .65 Dutch. This came up in one case, well, this came up in one area because Indonesia actually rebarreled a lot of Dutch Mannlichers to .303 because they had access to .303 British ammunition. Why this particular Snabb has also been rebarreled in .303 British is an interesting question, and I do not know why. So here is the disassembled front end of the Snabb conversion. Now, we spent, 3 other people and I, about an hour to figure out how to get it to this point. It's not completely disassembled, but this is as far as we're able to get it. So what we have going on here is we have 2 springs. There's one spring still in this tube. It runs on the outside of this bar. So when I push this, you can see the whole forend moves. And it's a really stiff spring. Then, inside here, we have this spring. So we have this inner spring right here, if I can get to it. We have this inner spring, and we have an outer spring right there. So the Snabb fundamentally is a gas trap action. This is just a cover. There's no gas port anywhere in this assembly. It's just a block to hold all the pieces in the right relative space. This slides over the muzzle, and as you can see when it's set up here, we have a little bit of extra space between the end of the barrel and the end of this gas cap. That is going to contain gas pressure when it fires, which is going to pull this whole assembly forward. Now, when this is on the gun, this tube comes out that hole and is held in place by this little screw. Right, like that. And this screw pulls this tube forward whenever the gun fires. Now, we have this piece with ratchet teeth on it. And because of the angle of this bend, this is actually how this piece is supposed to be made. When I pull this forward, these teeth are going to pull down towards this tube. And you can see that working just a little bit. The spring in this is really strong, and I can only pull it a little bit. Now, if you look down in that tube, it's cut out, and we have a second set of ratcheting teeth. That set of ratcheting teeth is connected to this rod. That rod is connected to this, which is the bolt carrier. The bolt carrier is connected back here to the bolt by these 2 ears at the back. So make a long story short, when this rod goes back, it pushes the bolt carrier and the bolt with it. So what's happening here is this whole assembly gets pulled forward by the gas trap action. The bolt is locked in battery because the gun is firing, which means everything's at its forward position, which means when this goes forward, it's compressing that spring at the front. This goes all the way forward until the teeth here lock onto the teeth on this inner rod. When that happens, it's reached full travel, and then the spring here pulls it backwards. Because these 2 sets of teeth are now locked together, it pushes this rod backwards with it. This rod is connected to the bolt carrier and the bolt, thus pushing them backwards. They will continue backwards a little bit on just force, and then the rest on inertia. They'll cycle all the way back, eject the empty case, and once they're all the way at the rear end of travel, this spring, which is on this rod, right there, now this spring is compressed, and it is going to pull the bolt forward back into battery. We now see exactly why this was never adopted by anybody. Now, normally, the bolt in a bolt-action rifle is manually turned by hand to lock and unlock using these two locking lugs. And one of the problems of a self-loading conversion is if you don't have a straight pull bolt, you have to come up with some other way to translate forward and backward motion into rotational motion of the bolt. So what Snabb did was actually add an extension to the back of the bolt with 3 camming screw tracks. And then he's got this copper or brass lug on the back. These are not actually locking lugs, although they look like it. These are guide lugs, so they travel in the same path as the locking lugs at the front of the bolt. And then these 2 rectangular cutouts are where they attach to the bolt carrier, like so. So this is our regular cocking piece. It's going to get caught on the sear, and it's connected directly to the firing pin. You can see the firing pin is currently exposed. And when I pull the back of the bolt backwards, the firing pin cams back into the bolt. So this is how the firing pin is going to be while the bolt's traveling. And this is going to catch on the sear. The bolt is then going to continue forward under spring pressure like this, thus pulling the firing pin nicely back. And then when you pull the trigger, this whole thing drops and the firing pin protrudes and fires. All right, reassembling this, I'm working on putting the gas system back together. So we've got the spring inside this, and then it has a threaded on cap that is going to go on the outside. So that goes on there. I'll just tighten that, make sure it's snug. Then this screw, this guide rod and spring connect to the bolt carrier here. We have now reconnected the bolt carrier here to the gas piston. There's a cap nut there, and then 2 washers with a lock washer between them back here. So now, when the bolt goes back, there we go. When the bolt goes back, it is compressing the spring inside this tube as this guide rod comes out. And when that happens, up here at the front, you can see that inner rod moving back and forth. And it is important when you put that guide rod back in, because remember the guide rod at the back is the same piece of metal that has these teeth at the front. You need to make sure that the teeth are pointing upward towards this set of teeth, because it's very easy to put the guide rod in, rotate it incorrectly, and then with no teeth to catch on, the rifle won't ever function, and you'll have no idea why unless you actually understand how it works, and then take it apart to check on that. So that is, among other things, the symbol of a not very good design in the first place. Now that the gas system is completely assembled, the next step to putting this back together is to put this front end back on, the gas cap. And this just slides on against friction, like that. And then what prevents this from simply blowing off the gun the first time you fire is this end cap screw, which is going to go on here. And it has a little spring-loaded keeper right there. And we're going to pull this down, rotate it up, and now it is nicely locked in position. So now, when this cycles forward, it pulls the whole action with it, which you probably can't really see because it is still a very strong spring. And now we can just go ahead with the final simple steps of assembly. We have a rear cap on the receiver, which is just going to screw on. That covers up these 2 holes where the guide rods, the bolt rods can come out. That goes on there. It's important to note when taking this in or out of the stock that the bolt carrier, this rod, is actually underneath this piece of the wood right there. So you can't just drop the action in with the bolt closed. You have to actually lock the bolt open to put it in the stock. All right, we have the action in the stock. Now we can put the trigger guard back in. It has 2 screws. And last but not least, a handguard. Handguard snaps on. Put that down. Oh, and then last but not least, we have the sling swivel and barrel band, which is a two-piece assembly. Actually has a pair of very small screws holding it together. We'll put that there. And back together. At this point, you should be able to see, I think, pretty well why nobody purchased large numbers of Snabb conversions for their country, because this is more like military sabotage to adopt this than improvement of your arsenal. Just to repeat, in case it wasn't totally clear, this is a gas trap design. The forward end of the barrel here has a gap that traps gas. This goes forward. It pulls a piston forward with it. When the piston gets all the way forward, it catches on a second internal piston, which it then pushes back forcefully from a recoil spring, which pushes the bolt back. The bolt is going to cycle to the rear, and then another spring pulls the bolt forward to load another cartridge and lock it in place. That's why this is so complicated. I do want to thank the Dutch National Military Museum for allowing me to take this gun apart. This is the first time, not the first time I've seen a Snabb, but it is the first time I've actually gotten inside one, and I had no idea it was as complicated as it truly is. So with that in mind, if you're ever here in the Netherlands, definitely make time in your schedule to check out the museum. It is a fantastic combined arms military museum, airplanes, guns, tanks, all sorts of cool stuff, and definitely worth your time to visit. If you don't have a chance to get to the Netherlands and you're just watching on the internet, if you appreciate seeing this sort of thing on the internet, please consider taking a moment to check out my Patreon page. It is contributors there at $1 a month that make it possible for me to travel, find these guns, and take them apart for you. Thanks for watching.